I'm looking at a flyer that's for Voice Today, and the first thing I noticed was the child on the front with the Band-Aid over his face. And when I first saw it, I was like, what is that? And as I'm reading it, it makes me realize more and more why I wanted to interview my next guest. They're Angela Williams and Tom Scales of Voice Today. And as I'm reading the pamphlet, more and more I feel better about doing the interview. When I first met them, I was very nervous to speak with them, to talk to them. And throughout this interview, I have learned a lot. I've realized why God put this in my heart so heavy to talk about. I'm getting teary-eyed even talking about it, but I wanted to read something to you. It says, 1 in 4 girls are sexually abused. 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused. Only 1 in 10 will tell anyone. And listening to their stories, I realized how important it is for every single person, whether you're black, white, Asian, whatever. Why it's so important for everyone to reach out. Whether you have kids, I don't have kids, but it's still a very important topic to me. Whether you've been molested, whether you haven't, why it's so important that we as adults reach out to the children that are in this situation, as well as the children who are currently going through that situation. Why it's so important for them to talk and speak out to people. And it just goes right along with my motto, that death and life are in the power of the tongue. So as I speak with these two people, I hope that it blesses you. For those that have never spoken about what has happened to them, I hope that it gives you the strength to speak out. And most of all, I hope that you are able to heal. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. When we speak, we recognize in adversity that our words determine our fate. When we speak, life and death are in the power of the tongue. When we speak. I'm joined today with Angela Williams. She is the founder of Voice Today, as well as she's the author of From Sorrows to Sapphires. I want to thank you for joining me today.
Jermaine, I'm so excited. Thank you for interviewing me.
I'm glad you accepted. I was so nervous the day I met you. All of my friends had to kind of push me, like, go talk to her, go talk to her.
Very silly of you.
But when I met you at the auction that you all were having, and you had a couple of people come up and speak that were involved in Voice Today, and like I said, which is your foundation. And when one of the ladies, when she was speaking, it touched me so much because she was talking about how she had never spoken out about what had happened to her and stuff like that. And since my audience is not sure of what Voice Today is, can you just tell us a little bit about Voice Today?
I'd be glad to. Every chance I get, I talk about Voice Today. So, we're a 501c3 faith-based nonprofit organization, and our mission is to break the silence and the cycle of child sexual abuse worldwide. And we do that in 3 ways. We want to bring this issue out of the closet. Really, no one wants to talk about it. It's very stigmatized. So we have an awareness program that we'll be launching this year that you will know who Voice Today is, and you will know about the subject of child sexual abuse. It's an exciting campaign that's really gut-wrenching and very compelling. The second mission of Voice is prevention and protection. We want to teach adults that child sexual abuse is predictable and it's preventable. So we teach a series of workshops that helps adults understand the issue and understand what they can do proactively to become vigilant in protecting a child. And then our third mission is healing and restoration. There are so many of your viewers, there's so many out there that are survivors, and they are suffering in this silent prison of pain. Just like the woman who touched your heart, they've never spoken about it. And it really has a hold on their lives, a bondage, so to speak. And they need to be delivered. They need to understand that it was not their fault, that they don't need to carry the burden of that shame, and they need to know that God wants them walking in victory and complete freedom. And our healing and restoration programs range from retreats to workshops to support groups and books. My book is a healing resource. My executive director, Tom Scales, his book. So we offer a lot of resources on our website.
Okay. So what inspired you to start the organization?
Oh my goodness. I would say first and foremost was a definite calling from God. And if you've ever had a calling and you know that God has called you to something that's so outside of your limits and your realm of possibility, you know it's God, because you know you got to depend totally on Him. So it definitely was a calling. And secondly, when I was a child, I never broke my silence. I never told anyone. When I grew into adulthood, I felt very ashamed for what had happened. I felt almost like I was consensual in it, even though it started at 3, and logically I had no power at 3 years old. And I found very few resources and very few people that really wanted to talk about it and address the issue. So I saw a great need for what we offer, and it's time. Its time has come that we break the silence.
In your book, one thing in particular I noticed that you were talking about was your experiences with your mother, and kind of not necessarily ignoring it, but you think that she knew, you may have known what was going on, but wasn't able to face it. What would you say to other, let's say, mothers that may know that something like that may be going on with their child?
I would say just encourage them to have the courage that it takes to protect a child. It's very scary to think about your husband, your a family member, your boyfriend, that they're doing this to your child, and it's almost like you can't face that reality. But I think the focus needs to turn on this helpless child, and you're the only chance and the only opportunity that they have for safety. And I will tell you that it has wounded my relationship with my mother in such a way that, 20, 30 years later, we're still trying to heal. We're still trying to develop a relationship. So if it is their responsibility, they had that child, it is their responsibility to protect that child. And we minister to hundreds and hundreds of survivors, and I can count on one hand how many parents stepped in and protected their child. And that's a disgrace. To me, it's a total disgrace. If she ever looked into my eyes, she should have seen the agony and the pain. Just sit still and let me touch you. I'll show you how to be a good girl. If she ever looked into my eyes, she would have seen the agony and the pain.
Like when you go back and you actually read portions of your book, what goes through your mind at that time?
I see the little girl. Like I see that moment in time. It's taken me a long time to not replay the tapes in my mind. And this book was extremely cathartic in doing that, because what would play over and over in my head sometimes were these scenes. And when I was able to write the book and finish the last chapter and I closed it, God gave me such a peace that if I ever had to revisit those memories, I could go pick up this book. But I didn't have to carry them with me, and they didn't have to play in my head over and over. So when I open it and I read it, I have great compassion and great empathy for the little girl and what she was going through at that moment. So if you heard a little crackle in my voice, it was, I can see that moment.
One of the things I noticed in your book is that you were saying that you were trying to protect your mother, or may have been your family's reputation or whatever. Why do you think that was?
I grew up believing that my mother's first failed marriage was my fault. My biological father did not want children, and when I was born, they separated. At my birth, they separated, and I got told the story over and over that I was given to him in his arms, and he held me for about 30 seconds and gave me back and didn't want anything to do with me. So I took on the responsibility. First, I took on that rejection. Then I took on that responsibility that I was the cause of that failed marriage. So the protection is I didn't want to hurt her. He was very controlling, so I protected her in that his threats to kill her if I ever told. So that protection, that her life was in my hands. And I wanted to try as best I could to make the family that I had peaceful and happy. And so I kept trying to comply with his perverse needs and wants, and trying to talk him out of being so cruel. You know, I think a lot of times older child syndrome, maybe it's a survivor syndrome where you think somehow, some way, this is all your fault and you can fix it.
And I think one of the biggest myths about sexual abuse is, poverty and stuff like that. Because, like, for example, that's one of the things that you definitely pointed out in the book, that you all weren't rich, but you were very well class.
We were middle class, and I think that's the easy thing for people to accept, that it's the drug-infested Harlems of the world, the projects, that's where it's taking place, and it's maybe in the Hispanic culture only, or maybe the African-American culture only, but it crosses every culture, every economic base, every ethnic group. It crosses promise you. And if I talk to an African American, they say, oh, that's a Hispanic problem. I talk to Hispanics, oh, that's a Caucasian problem. I talk to Caucasians, oh, that's an Asian problem.
Right.
No one wants to take responsibility that it's all of our problems, and it's all over the world. And it's boys and it's girls, and it's people that you would never suspect. It's people with very good jobs. It's people in very high positions. It's people in the church, it's people in schools, it's people in their homes, and that's what they can't get their arms around. We are all trained, we're conditioned to stranger danger. We're taught to be afraid of a stranger. We're taught that a perpetrator looks dirty and gruff and probably wearing a trench coat. Everybody thinks a trench coat. That's what we're taught and conditioned, and we have to absolutely abolish that stereotype and that thinking, and that's what Voice wants to do. We can't look at an appearance to make a child safe. We have to look at behavior. What is that behavior around a child, and how is that child being groomed, and how are you possibly being groomed?
Well, as a parent, like, how do you think they would begin to kind of know? Are there signs that they should start noticing?
There are definite signs. Let's start one step before the signs. Let's start with how, as an adult, you take on the responsibility for predicting and protecting your child from child sexual abuse. Let's start there, and that's what Voice Today we teach. We teach adults how to prevent child sexual abuse. But if you think your child is being abused, there are signs, and the signs is usually a drastic change in behavior that you cannot explain. A lot of times it could be withdrawal, it could be lying, it could be wetting the bed, it could be crying out for attention, it could be extreme anger and rage. So most of us know our children, we know our nieces, we know our nephews, we know the children that are in our lives. And when you recognize this change in behavior, you've got to have the courage to ask the questions. And you've got to have the courage to ask, has anyone touched your private parts? Has anyone crossed your personal boundaries? Is there someone that makes you feel uncomfortable? Is there someone making you do something you don't want to do? And begin to have that dialogue with a child.
So after this video, if we had someone who's curious more about Voice Today, how could they find out more about Voice Today?
I hope they're curious. I hope they find out more, because we need volunteers. We are building an army in this battle. And that army is people that we want to engage to come alongside of us and help us, to host a workshop, to volunteer with Voice. We have 1,000,001 different projects and jobs to be done. To donate, if you can donate $5, that would go so far with Voice Today. But they can go to voicetoday.org. It's that simple.
Okay.
Connect with any of us, and I'm happy to talk. And I'm not as removed as Doreen says, so I will pick up the phone and answer and be glad to talk to you. They should absolutely read the book, because child sexual abuse is an epidemic. I wouldn't say all, but a lot of our social ills are rooted in child sexual abuse. So they need to understand the issue. They need to understand why a child doesn't tell. They need to understand why adults look the other way. They need to understand the impact and the trauma on a life that doesn't last a month, a year. It lasts a lifetime. And until they open my book and truly read that journey of that little girl and how she so suffered and so tried to tell, she tried so many ways non-verbally to speak out and was never, ever listened to. and as a woman, how she tried to put on the mask and tried to survive. And they may have a wife, they may have a husband, they may have a child, they may have someone in their lives that until they read my book, they don't even realize that they're suffering. You know, so it may take the blinders off and help them be able to minister to someone else.
It's funny that you say that, because when I when you accepted, and I was all excited, and I was telling everybody, I was like, yeah, I'm reading this book, and and all this other stuff, and it was amazing because I didn't know that the two people I was talking to at that moment told me about the experiences they had had.
Well, see, it's opened your eyes.
Yeah.
It's opened your eyes, and when your eyes are open, you become a safe person. Okay, you know about the issue, and you're willing to talk about the issue. So I guarantee you, long after this interview, people will feel comfortable to open up to you because you know more about the issue, and you're not going to condemn them or judge them. And for some reason, society has so stigmatized, and it's such a taboo subject that shame is placed on the victim. And that's one of the social changes that Voice wants to bring about, is we want to remove that stigma from the victim and let's place it on the perpetrator where it belongs. Because a child has no power, they have no voice. They're being manipulated, controlled by fear, controlled by threats against maybe family members. So we need to look at this whole issue differently, and we need to step in and be the advocate for the child. My first advice for a survivor is to break their silence. That's the first step, because when you keep the silence and the pain inside and the shame inside, you're bearing all the responsibility for that abuse. And no matter what type of response you think you're going to get, it's better to get it out and to find a safe person that you can tell and not be embarrassed or ashamed. But to get that disclosure out, when I talk a lot about when someone keeps child sexual abuse inside in their entire life, it's like they're holding a beach ball underwater. And that amount of energy that it takes to keep that secret buried and to keep it down. So I would encourage them to break their silence. There's a number of ways that we can help them. We have a support group that we run twice a month, and it's in Cobb County. We have also workshops, healing workshops. And then thirdly, for females, we hope to have a retreat or a conference for men soon. But for females, we have a retreat coming up. And it's a 3-day retreat called The Voice of Peace. And they can get information on our website, on our healing page. And it's September the 23rd through the 25th. And we're going to accept 15 women. And last year we had all ages from 17 to 68. So don't think you're too young, or don't think you're too old, but that's a weekend where we have very intense fellowship and Bible study and praise and worship and great activities, and just a time to really come to grips with, in a very safe environment, with what's happened, the trauma, and maybe some of the destructive behaviors that resulted, and then how you truly can make a commitment to healing and walk in victory. That's really my message to survivors. You do not need to live in that place of pain. That's not where God wants you. He wants you happy and laughing and smiling and really taking on the challenge of whatever the mission that God's called you to do.